I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I grabbed my bag and walked out the door because I needed my stepfather to believe he had won. He thought changing the locks was enough to erase me from my mother's estate. But he forgot that the person holding the brass keys isn't the owner. The person holding the deed is, when he walks into that closing meeting. He has no idea he's about to sign his own prison sentence instead of a sales contract. My name is Lily Scott, and the dirt on my mother's grave had not even settled before my stepfather decided to bury me too. The scent of funeral lilies and stale casserole still hung heavy in the hallway of the house I had grown up in, a cloying reminder of the woman we had put in the ground 3 hours ago. I was standing in the kitchen, still wearing my black dress, reaching for a glass of water, when a single sheet of paper slammed onto the granite island with a violence that made the crystal vase tremble. Gordon Pike stood on the other side of the island. He did not look like a grieving widower. He looked like a cornered animal trying to bare its teeth. "I have already listed the house," Gordon said, his voice flat and devoid of any warmth that might have existed when my mother was alive. "You have exactly 1 hour to get your trash out of here." I stared at him, my hand hovering halfway to the faucet. The silence in the kitchen was sudden and absolute. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," he snapped, adjusting the cuffs of his suit jacket. It was a suit my mother had bought him for their anniversary 2 years ago. "I am selling the place, and I need the room clear. Kendra is moving in tonight." Kendra. The name hung in the air like a foul odor. Kendra Vale was his home care coordinator, the woman who was supposed to be changing IV drips, but ended up changing the dynamic of our entire family. He was moving his mistress into my mother's sanctuary before the funeral guests had even finished their drive home. I looked down at the paper he had thrown. It was a quitclaim deed. My eyes scanned the legal jargon, skipping over the standard boilerplate text until they landed on the bottom line. It was dated 4 days ago. The signature scrawled next to the printed name of my mother was shaky, disjointed, and jagged. It looked nothing like the elegant, looping script my mother practiced on holiday cards. It looked like the handwriting of a woman who could barely lift a finger, let alone sign away her legacy. Or worse, it looked like a forgery made by a hand trembling with adrenaline. "This," I said, pointing a finger at the signature without touching the paper, "does not look right, Gordon." "She signed it," he said, too quickly. "She wanted me to have the house, to take care of things." I raised my eyes to the window behind him. Through the sheer curtains, I could see the street. A black SUV was parked directly in front of our driveway, idling. It was out of place in our quiet suburban cul-de-sac. Inside, 2 men with thick necks and dark sunglasses sat motionless, staring straight at the front door. They looked like statues carved from muscle and bad intent. I understood instantly. Gordon was not just grieving, he was drowning. He did not just want to sell the house, he had to. Those men outside were not here to pay their respects. They were the reason Gordon's hands were shaking. He was leveraging a dead woman's asset to pay off a debt that was very much alive. I did not scream. I did not throw the glass I was holding, even though the urge to shatter something was so strong it made my fingers ache. Screaming would make him feel powerful. Screaming would make him think I was just a hysterical stepdaughter he could brush aside. I looked him dead in the eye, dropping my voice to a register that was calm, cold, and terrifyingly level. "Just make sure you enjoy the house, Gordon," I said, "while you still can." I turned on my heel and walked past him. He blinked, clearly expecting a fight, a plea, or tears. He got none of it. "1 hour! Lily!" he shouted after me, checking his watch like a prison warden. "If you are not out, I am throwing your stuff on the lawn." I went to my room, the room I had grown up in, the room where I had studied for my SATs and cried over high school breakups. I grabbed my suitcase from the closet. I had to be surgical. There was no time for nostalgia. I packed my laptop first. My life and my work were on that hard drive. I grabbed 3 suits, my toiletries, and the hard drive backup I kept in my desk drawer. Then, I went to the closet shelf. I pulled down a small, battered wooden box. It contained nothing of monetary value. Just old photos, a silver rattle, and my mother's favorite silk scarf. I tucked it deep into the suitcase, beneath my sweaters. Gordon stood in the doorway the entire time, arms crossed, tapping his foot. He was watching me like he thought I would steal the copper wiring out of the walls. 40 minutes, he sneered. I zipped the suitcase. The sound was loud in the empty room. I slung my laptop bag over my shoulder and walked toward him. He did not move. I had to step around him, forcing him to shift his weight. He smelled of scotch and desperation. I dragged my suitcase down the hall, the wheels rumbling on the hardwood floor, a sound that echoed like thunder in the silence. I reached the front door and opened it. The late afternoon sun hit my face, but it felt cold. And then I saw her. Kendra Vale was standing on the porch, leaning against the railing. She was wearing a bright yellow sundress that was aggressively cheerful for a funeral day. In her hand, she held a ceramic mug. It was blue with hand-painted daisies, my mother's favorite coffee mug, the one she drank from every single morning for 20 years. Kendra took a slow sip, her eyes locking onto mine over the rim. She didn't say a word, she just smirked, a small, tight expression of victory. She looked at me like I was the help leaving after a shift, while she was the lady of the manor. My grip on the suitcase handle tightened until my knuckles turned white. Seeing her holding that mug hurt more than the eviction notice. It was a violation. It was a claim of ownership over my mother's life, not just her property. I walked past her without a word. I dragged my luggage down the concrete steps, the rhythmic thud, thud, thud marking my departure. I had barely reached the bottom step when I heard the click. I turned around. Gordon was already at the door with a screwdriver and a new brass lock set. He wasn't just locking the door, he was replacing the cylinder immediately. He worked with a frantic speed, screwing the new hardware into the frame. Click, the door slammed shut. The sound echoed in the cul-de-sac. Final and absolute. It sounded like my mother was being buried a second time, this time by the people who were supposed to protect her memory. I walked down the driveway, past the idling black SUV. The men inside turned their heads slowly to watch me pass, their gazes heavy and assessing. I kept my chin up, staring straight ahead, dragging my life behind me on 2 rubber wheels. I made it to the bus stop at the corner just as the number 42 bus pulled up. I hauled my suitcase up the steps and collapsed into a plastic seat near the back. The bus smelled of diesel and damp raincoats. I took my phone out of my pocket. My hands were finally shaking now, the adrenaline crash hitting me all at once. But I did not dial a lawyer. I did not call my best friend to cry. Instead, I opened my notes app. I typed in the time, 3:45 p.m. I typed in the license plate number of the black SUV I had memorized as I walked past. I typed in the name of the locksmith company van I had seen parked around the block, waiting for Gordon's signal. I looked out the window as the bus pulled away. The house grew smaller in the distance, a majestic colonial structure that held all my memories and now, all my enemies. Gordon thought he had won because he held the keys. He thought that by pushing me out, he had silenced me. He thought I was just a grieving daughter who would go away and lick her wounds. He was wrong. I wiped a single, traitorous tear from my cheek and stared at the glowing screen of my phone. I did not need to fight him for the keys to the front door. I did not need to scream and shout on the lawn for the neighbors to hear. I was not going to get my mother's house back with tears. I was going to get it back at the closing table. And I would bring hell with me. My name is Lily Scott. I am 33 years old, and in my professional life, I am a senior risk analyst for Larkspire Analytics. My job is to look at a stable company, find the invisible cracks in its foundation, and predict exactly when and how it will collapse. It is a career built on skepticism and the understanding that people lie, but numbers do not. It is ironic, then, that while I was busy predicting market crashes for billion-dollar corporations, I failed to see the total liquidation of my own family happening right across the hallway. For the last 6 months of my mother's life, I barely stepped foot in my own office. I ceased to be a data analyst and became a professional daughter, I traded my ergonomic desk chair for a vinyl recliner in the oncology ward. I lived in a world of beeping monitors, saline drips, and the acrid smell of hospital antiseptic. I was the one who signed the consent forms. I was the one who memorized the medication schedules. I was the one who argued with insurance adjusters on the phone for 45 minutes at a time while heating up stale cafeteria soup. Gordon was notably absent from these vigils. He called them business trips. He claimed he was driving up and down the coast, securing investments to ensure my mother had the best care possible, but the math never added up. When I checked the joint account to pay the hospice deposit, I noticed the irregularities: $300 withdrawn from an ATM near a casino, $200 at a liquor store, $500 in cash withdrawals with no receipts. When I asked him about it, his eyes would slide away from mine, and he would mutter something vague about networking expenses or diversified assets. He would stay out until 2 a.m. and come home smelling of peppermint mouthwash and secrets. Then Kendra Vale appeared. Gordon introduced her as a home care coordinator, a title that sounded professional enough to lower my guard. She was supposed to be there to manage the transition from hospital to home hospice, to organize the nurses and the equipment. But Kendra did not seem interested in oxygen tanks or morphine dosages. I would come home from the pharmacy to find her not in the guest room where my mother lay dying, but in the master bedroom. I caught her once standing in the center of the walk-in closet, running her hands over my mother's vintage coats. Another time, I found her in the study, tracing a finger along the spines of first edition books. She wasn't checking for dust. She was checking for value. The house began to change in subtle, terrifying ways. It started with the small things. A watercolor landscape that had hung in the hallway for 15 years vanished. When I asked Gordon, he said the frame was broken and he had sent it for repairs. Then the silver serving set, the one we only used for Thanksgiving, moved from the buffet to the kitchen counter and then disappeared entirely. Gordon claimed he was having it polished. I knew better. These were not the actions of a grieving husband preparing for loss. These were the actions of a merchant preparing an inventory. He was testing the waters to see what he could liquidate without raising an alarm. The climax of this charade came yesterday at the funeral. Gordon put on the performance of a lifetime. He stood by the open grave, his shoulders shaking with what looked like racking sobs. He clutched a handkerchief to his face, accepting the condolences of neighbors and friends. He let the widow from next door hug him, leaning his weight on her as if he were too weak to stand. But I was watching him from 3 feet away. I saw the moment the neighbors turned their backs. The shaking stopped instantly. He wiped his face, and his eyes were dry. His expression was not one of sorrow. It was the bored, stony look of a man waiting for a meeting to end. But the moment that truly stole the air from my lungs happened at the wake held in the church basement. I was stirring sugar into a cup of lukewarm tea when Kendra walked in. She wasn't wearing black. She was wearing a charcoal gray dress that was tight enough to be inappropriate, but it was what rested against her collarbone that made my vision blur. Around her neck was a string of pearls. They were Akoya pearls, perfectly round and lustrous, with a distinct diamond clasp shaped like a rose. My mother had worn those pearls on her wedding day. She had worn them to my college graduation, 2 days before she fell into her final coma. She had whispered to me that they were in the safety deposit box, waiting for me. She said, "Lily, wear these when you find someone who loves you as much as I do." And there they were, warming the skin of the woman who was sleeping with my stepfather. I walked over to Kendra. My hands were trembling, but not from grief. I stared at the pearls. Kendra saw me looking. She didn't flush. She didn't try to hide them. She reached up and fingered the pearls, rolling them between her thumb and forefinger with a possessive familiarity. "Gordon gave them to me," she said, her voice dropping so only I could hear. "He said your mother wanted me to have something to remember her by." That was the moment I understood the scale of the war I was in. This was not just about greed. Gordon didn't just want the money. He wanted to erase us. He wanted to peel away every layer of my mother's existence, her home, her jewelry, her legacy, and paste his new life over it. He was treating my mother's life like a tear-down property, clearing the lot to build something tacky and cheap for himself and Kendra. I left the wake early. I went straight to the efficiency studio apartment I had rented 2 weeks ago when the tension in the house became unbearable. It is a miserable place on the edge of town. The carpet smells of damp wool and years of spilled beer. The walls are paper thin, and the faucet drips a rhythmic torture all night long. I sat on the floor, surrounded by cardboard boxes, and for the first time in 6 months, I let myself break. I cried until my chest heaved and my throat burned. I cried for the house I was locked out of. I cried for the pearls. I cried for the mother who couldn't protect me anymore. And then, just as quickly as it started, I stopped. It was like flipping a switch on a circuit breaker. The tears dried on my cheeks, leaving my skin tight. I stood up and washed my face in the stained sink. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror. My eyes were red, but the panic was gone. I am a risk analyst. My entire career is built on identifying when a system is unstable. Gordon was unstable. He was desperate, indebted, and arrogant. He thought he had cleared the board by locking me out. He thought speed was his ally. If Gordon wanted to sell the house fast, I would not stand in his way. In fact, I would help him. I would clear the path so he could run full speed ahead. I would let him sell the house, because that was the only way to trap him. He wanted a quick sale. I would give him a quick death. Not a physical one, but a financial and legal execution so complete he would never recover. I turned on my laptop and opened a new file. I didn't name it Revenge. I named it Acquisition. Gordon thought he had severed my connection to the house when he changed the Wi-Fi password and the alarm codes. He is a man who understands physical barriers, deadbolts, fences, security guards, but he is functionally illiterate when it comes to the digital footprint. He forgot that for the last 2 years, I was the administrator of our digital lives. He thought cutting off the main network locked me out, but he failed to realize that data, like water, always finds a way to leak through if you know where the cracks are. I sat in my dim studio apartment, the blue light of my laptop screen illuminating the peeling paint on the wall. I did not try to hack into the main security system. That would trigger an alert on his phone, and I needed to remain a ghost instead. I bypassed the front door entirely and went for the back window he had left wide open. The document backup system, 8 months ago. When Mom's medical bills started becoming a chaotic avalanche of paper, I installed a high-speed scanner in the study. I had configured it to automatically upload every single scanned page to a private cloud server I managed. I did this so I could audit the hospital charges from my office. Gordon never used the scanner. He preferred to hoard paper in piles he never sorted. But evidently, desperation had forced him to learn new tricks. I logged into the cloud drive. My fingers hovered over the trackpad as the directory refreshed. There it was, a file named ed_final.pdf. I felt a cold prickle of sweat run down my spine. I moved my cursor to the information tab to check the metadata. The file had been created at 12 minutes past 1 in the morning on the Tuesday prior to my mother's death. I closed my eyes, letting the timeline reconstruct itself in my head. That Tuesday, I had been at the hospital for 16 hours straight. My mother had been in and out of consciousness, her hands so swollen from edema that she could not even hold a spoon to feed herself broth. The idea that she could sit at a desk and sign a complex legal document at 1 in the morning was not just a lie, it was a biological impossibility. I dug deeper into the upload history. The cloud never forgets. Before the final file, there were 3 other uploads logged between midnight and 1 o'clock in the morning. They were labeled simply as scan_01, scan_02, and scan_03. I opened them. They were practice runs. Someone had taken a piece of blank printer paper and practiced my mother's signature over and over again. The first few attempts were laughable, too sharp and angular. By the 3rd page, the forgery was getting better, the loops becoming softer, mimicking the tremor of an ailing woman but retaining the shape of her name. Gordon had not just forced her to sign. He, or someone else, had manufactured her consent in the dead of night while I was wiping her brow in a hospital bed 5 miles away. But a PDF is just a digital echo. I needed to see the hand that held the pen. I minimized the browser and opened a different application. A proprietary video client that connected to a standalone server. Gordon knew about the security cameras on the porch and the garage. He did not know about the nanny cam I had hidden in the study 3 months ago. I had installed it after the silver serving set went missing. I had suspected one of the cleaning staff, but I never caught them. The camera was a tiny black cube, no larger than a die, wedged between a set of vintage encyclopedias on the top shelf, overlooking the mahogany desk. It did not run on the house Wi-Fi. It recorded to a local hard drive that backed up to a separate, encrypted server I used for my own off-site storage. The login screen blinked at me. I typed in the password. It wasn't a random string of numbers. It was Blue Hydrangea 1992, the flower my mother planted the year I was born. The screen flickered, black pixels dancing before resolving into a saved video file from that Tuesday night. The angle was high. Looking down at the desk. The room was dimly lit by the green glass banker's lamp. Gordon was there. He was wearing his bathrobe, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He looked agitated, pacing back and forth in the limited frame. Then, Kendra walked into the shot. Seeing her in that room, on that night, made my stomach turn. She was wearing one of my mother's silk shawls draped over her shoulders like she was playing dress-up. She was holding a wine glass, not just any glass, but the Waterford crystal goblet my mother saved for Christmas Eve. They were toasting. They were celebrating the theft of a dying woman's legacy while she was still breathing. Gordon sat down at the desk. He placed a document in the center of the blotter. The quitclaim deed. I turned the volume up on my laptop until the speakers crackled. "Stop pacing, Gordon," Kendra said. Her voice was tinny through the microphone, but the command was clear. "Just get it done. The notary is waiting outside." "I am worried about the signature matching the bank records," Gordon muttered. He took a long swig of his drink. "If the title company audits this, we are finished. They won't audit it if we sell fast enough," Kendra replied. Leaning over the desk, she placed a hand on his shoulder, not in comfort, but in pressure. "Just trace the line I made on the practice sheet." I watched, frozen, as Gordon picked up the pen. He hesitated for a second, not out of morality, but out of fear of getting caught. Then, he bent low and signed my mother's name. He sat back and looked at the paper. "It looks shaky," he said. "She is dying." "Gordon," Kendra said, taking the glass from his hand and taking a sip. "It is supposed to look shaky. If it looked perfect, that would be suspicious." Gordon laughed then. It was a dry, hollow sound. "You are right. As long as it holds up for a few days. A bad signature is fine. We just need to get the title transfer recorded before Lily starts asking questions about the will." I hit pause. My hand was gripping the edge of the desk so hard my fingernails were digging into the wood. As long as it holds up for a few days. He admitted it. He admitted the timeline. He admitted the fraud. But I needed to watch the rest. Kendra had mentioned a notary. A deed is worthless without a notary seal. A legitimate notary would never stamp a document if the signer wasn't present. I hit play. Gordon stood up and waved at the doorway. "Send him in." A third person stepped into the frame. He was a short man, balding, carrying a heavy leather embosser bag. He didn't look like a family friend. He didn't look like anyone I had ever seen at the house. He walked up to the desk, barely glancing at Gordon or Kendra. He looked at the empty chair where my mother should have been sitting. "She is asleep upstairs," Gordon lied, though the man clearly didn't care. "I don't need to see her," the man said. His voice was raspy. "I just need the cash fee we discussed." Gordon reached into his robe pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. He slid it across the desk. The man opened it, thumbed through a stack of bills. I estimated it was at least $2,000, and nodded. He pulled out his stamp. Thump. He pressed the seal onto the paper next to the forged signature. I leaned closer to the screen, squinting at the high-definition freeze frame. I needed a name. As the man turned to leave, the light from the lamp caught the side of his bag. There was a luggage tag. It was blurry, but legible. Arthur J. Miller, Mobile Notary Services. I sat back in my chair, the silence of my apartment deafening. Gordon had made a mistake. He thought he was just fighting a grieving stepdaughter. He didn't realize he had just handed me the keys to a conspiracy. He hadn't just committed forgery. He had engaged in a conspiracy to commit wire fraud involving a corrupt public official. I saved the video. Then I saved it again to an external drive. Then I emailed a copy to a dead-drop email address I hadn't used since college. Gordon wanted a closing. I would give him one. But first, I had to find out exactly who Arthur J. Miller was, and why he was willing to sell his state commission for an envelope of cash. The crack in Gordon's armor just became a canyon. The law office of Elliot Marsh was less of a workplace and more of a time capsule. It was located in a brownstone that smelled of lemon oil, old leather, and dust. There were no glass walls or touchscreens here. The desk was a slab of mahogany that looked heavy enough to crush a man. And behind it sat Elliot, a lawyer who had drafted my mother's first will before I was even born. He was a man of few words and even fewer smiles. The kind of attorney who spoke as if every sentence he uttered was being carved into stone. I sat across from him, my laptop open on his pristine blotter. The video of Gordon and the crooked notary played in the silence of the room. The only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner and the tinny voices coming from my computer speakers. I watched Elliot's face. He did not gasp. He did not shake his head. He watched the screen with the intense, narrowing focus of a jeweler inspecting a diamond for a fatal flaw. When the video finished, I closed the laptop. The silence stretched out for 10 seconds, then 20. "It is not just dirty," Elliot said finally, his voice a low rumble. "It is rotten." I leaned forward, the adrenaline from the discovery still humming in my veins. "I want to file for an emergency injunction," I said. "I want to freeze the title, call the police, and have Gordon thrown out on the street by tonight. We have the proof." Elliot took off his reading glasses and began to clean them slowly with a handkerchief. He looked tired. "We could do that," he said. "We could file a lis pendens today. We could stop the sale. But think about what happens next." "Lily," I frowned. "What happens next is that he goes to jail." "Eventually," Elliot corrected. "But first, he will claim the video was doctored. He will claim he was under duress. He will claim he had verbal consent. He will use the equity in the house to hire a defense attorney who will drag this out in probate court for 3, maybe 5 years. He will live in that house the entire time while the courts decide." "Is that what you want? 5 years of Gordon sleeping in your mother's room while you pay legal fees?" I slumped back in the leather chair. The image of Gordon living there for another 5 years made my stomach turn. "No, I want him out. I want him gone forever. I want to end this in one stroke." Elliot nodded. He opened the top drawer of his desk and pulled out a heavy cream-colored folder. It was thick, tied with a string. He untied it with deliberate slowness. "Your mother was sick, Lily," Elliot said softly, "but she was not blind, and she was certainly not stupid." He slid a document toward me. It was the original last will and testament, signed 6 months ago, right before the decline began. But underneath it was a second document I had never seen before. The header read, "Life Estate Deed with Conditional Limitation." "What is this?" I asked. "This is the safety net," Elliot said. "Your mother wanted Gordon to have a place to live. She loved him, despite his flaws. Or perhaps she just pitied him. She granted him a life estate. That means he has the legal right to live in the property for the rest of his natural life. He pays the taxes, he pays the upkeep, and he gets a roof over his head." My heart sank. "So he does own the house." "Read the provision on page 4, Elliot said, pointing a thick finger at a paragraph highlighted in yellow. I read the text. The legalese was dense, but the meaning was clear. "The grantee's interest in the property shall terminate immediately and automatically revert to the remainder man, Lily Scott, upon the occurrence of any attempt by the grantee to sell, mortgage, encumber, or otherwise alienate the title to the property. I looked up at Elliot, trying to process the words. Wait, does this mean what I think it means? It means his right to live there exists only as long as he treats it as a home, Elliot explained. The moment he treats it as an asset to be sold, he loses everything. He does not just lose the right to sell it, he loses the right to live there. The ownership snaps back to you instantly. He doesn't know about this, I whispered. No, Elliot said. He never came to the reading of the will because he thought he had already won by forging the quitclaim deed. He thinks he owns the fee simple title. He thinks he can cash out. Elliot then reached into the folder again and pulled out a small, sealed envelope. It had my name on it in my mother's handwriting. The ink was strong and steady, written before the sickness took her hands. She told me to give you this only if things got complicated, Elliot said. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of stationery and a sticky note with a 6-digit number. Lily. The letter read, I love Gordon, but I know he has trouble with money. I found letters from collection agencies in his car. I am afraid that when I am gone, his desperation will outweigh his judgment. I have set up the estate so he will always have a home, but he cannot sell our home to pay his gambling debts. If you are reading this, it means he is trying to do exactly that. The number is for the wall safe behind the painting in the study. I never told him the combination. I put the proof in there. Trust Elliot. Do what you have to do. I felt a lump form in my throat. I had spent the last 6 months thinking my mother was a victim. A fragile woman who had been duped by a con man. I was wrong. She had been protecting the house, and me, the entire time. She had built a trap, anticipating exactly where Gordon would step. The safe, I said, looking at the sticky note. 5289000, her birthday and mine. Inside that safe, Elliot said, you will likely find copies of the credit card offers he opened in her name, the loan rejection letters, and perhaps even a diary of his erratic behavior. She was building a case file. Lily. She just ran out of time to use it. I looked at the life estate document again. The plan began to form in my head, sharp and crystalline. If we stop the sale now, I said slowly, we are just enforcing the life estate. He stays in the house. He keeps living there, just unable to sell. Correct, Elliot said. If you file an injunction today, you save the house. But you are stuck with Gordon as a tenant for the next 20 or 30 years. But, I continued, my voice gaining strength, if we let him go to the closing, if we let him sign the papers to sell the house to a third party, then he has officially attempted to alienate the title, Elliot finished for me. A small, grim smile touching his lips. He triggers the forfeiture clause. The moment his pen leaves the paper, his life estate is void. He evicts himself. I sat back, the sheer elegance of it washing over me. It was perfect. It required no violence, no screaming, and no long court battle. It just required Gordon to be exactly who he was, a greedy, desperate man. So we don't stop him, I said. We let him walk into the trap. We let him think he is getting away with the heist of the century. Elliot agreed. We let him negotiate. We let him sign. And then, when the ink is wet, we drop the hammer. I looked at the number on the sticky note. I needed to get into that safe before the house was sold, just to secure the original documents my mother had hidden. But the legal path was clear. He thinks he is selling a house, I said, standing up and placing the letter carefully into my bag. But he is actually signing a confession. Elliot stood up as well and extended his hand. Not just a confession, Lily, it is a surrender. When he signs that sales contract, he isn't just committing fraud against the buyer, he is legally proving that he violated the one condition your mother gave him. He is handing you the house on a silver platter. I shook Elliot's hand. His grip was firm, reassuring. I will set up the shell company, I said. Let's give Gordon exactly what he wants, a buyer with cash, and a very tight deadline. "I will prepare the paperwork for the forfeiture," Elliot said. "Go get some sleep. Lily, you have a closing to attend." I walked out of the office into the bright afternoon sun, but the cold dread was gone. I touched the letter in my pocket. My mother hadn't left me defenseless. She had left me a weapon, and Gordon was about to pull the trigger on himself. We realized immediately that we could not use a civilian buyer. If we lured an innocent family into this mess, a young couple looking for their first home, or a retiree wanting a quiet place to settle down, they would become collateral damage. When the sale was inevitably voided, their deposit money would be tied up in litigation, their hearts would be broken, and they would be dragged into depositions for months. I refused to let Gordon's destruction spread to anyone else. We needed a buyer who did not exist. Elliot sat at his heavy oak desk and picked up the phone. He did not dial a real estate agent. He dialed a direct line to a contact he had at the State Bureau of Investigation, a man who specialized in white-collar property crimes. Because this transaction would involve a wire transfer across state lines, it technically fell under federal jurisdiction. But the local property fraud task force was hungry for a case like this. They had been trying to crack a ring of notary fraud in the county for months, and the video I had found of Arthur J. Miller was the key they had been missing. They did not just want Gordon, they wanted the notary, and they wanted to catch them in the act of a felony transaction. We needed a shell company. It had to sound imposing, faceless, and rich. It needed to sound like the kind of entity that chewed up family homes and spit out rental units without a second thought. We settled on the name Raven Rock Acquisitions, LLC. It was perfect. It sounded like a hedge fund that operated out of a glass tower in Manhattan. Elliot and I spent the next 2 hours crafting the legend. We needed a reason why this company would want to buy a house in the suburbs with cash. No inspection, and a closing date in less than 48 hours. "The 1031 exchange," Elliot said, tapping his pen on the legal pad. "It is the only thing that makes sense." He explained that in real estate tax law, an investor has a strict deadline to reinvest their profits from a previous sale to avoid paying capital gains tax. If they miss the deadline, they lose a fortune to the Internal Revenue Service. A desperate investor running up against a 1031 deadline is the golden goose for a seller like Gordon. It explains why the buyer is rushing, why they do not care about the leaky faucet or the old roof, and why they have cash ready to deploy immediately. We drafted the offer letter. I typed it out, channeling every cold, impersonal email I had ever received from corporate management at my own job. To the owner of record. The email began, "Raven Rock Acquisitions, LLC, is currently seeking to fulfill a 1031 exchange requirement before the end of the fiscal week. We have identified your property as a suitable asset for our portfolio. We are prepared to make an all-cash offer with a closing to occur no later than Friday afternoon." Now came the psychological trap. The house was easily worth $600,000 in the current market. If we offered full price, Gordon might get suspicious, or he might think he could get even more. But Gordon was a gambler, and the thing about gamblers is that they love the game as much as the prize. "We offer him $480,000, I said. Elliot looked at me over his glasses. "That is a low-ball offer. He might walk away." "He won't," I said, feeling a dark certainty in my gut. "He is desperate. He needs the money now, not in a month, but he also has an ego. If we offer low, he will feel compelled to counteroffer. He needs to feel like he is winning the negotiation. If he negotiates, he is proving that he believes he has the right to sell. He is digging his own grave with every email he sends." We added one final, crucial condition to the offer. We stated that because of the strict timeline, Raven Rock Acquisitions required the use of their preferred closing agents to expedite the title search. We named the firm Halloway and Finch Closing Services. Halloway and Finch did not exist. It was a front set up by the fraud task force, a controlled environment where the wire transfer could be monitored, received, and instantly frozen before it ever touched Gordon's offshore accounts. We were building a stage for him to perform his final act. and every prop was rigged. I sent the email to the address Gordon used for his consulting business at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Then, we waited. The silence in the office was heavy. I stared at the inbox, my heart hammering against my ribs. I wondered if he was at the house right now. I wondered if Kendra was looking over his shoulder. I wondered if they were already spending the money in their heads. 12 minutes later, a reply chimed on my laptop. I opened it. Gordon had taken the bait, but he was trying to play it cool. Dear Raven Rock team, he wrote, I have multiple interested parties in this property. However, I understand the urgency of your tax situation. I am willing to prioritize your offer, but $480,000 is below market value. I can agree to a fast closing if we settle at $520,000. Cash, wired same day. I showed the screen to Elliot. He let out a short, dry laugh. He is negotiating the price of a house he does not own. This is intent to defraud. Clear as day. I did not reply immediately. I let him sweat. I let him stare at his phone for 20 minutes. Wondering if he had pushed too hard. Wondering if the fish had swum away. I wanted his pulse to be racing. I wanted him to be terrified that he had lost the deal. Finally, I typed the response, agreed at $520,000, but we close on Friday at 10 o'clock in the morning sharp. If there are any delays, we walk away and buy a different property, take it or leave it. The response from Gordon came in 30 seconds. Agreed. Send the contract. I leaned back in the chair. Exhaling a breath I felt like I had been holding since the funeral. We had him. He had committed. He had just agreed to sell my mother's legacy to a shell company for a quick payout. Completely ignoring the life estate provision that gave him a roof over his head, Elliot began printing the fake purchase agreement. I will forward this chain to the task force, he said. They will have the closing room at the title company wired for sound and video by tomorrow morning. Mason Reed will be acting as the attorney for Raven Rock. He is the lead investigator. I looked at the calendar on the wall. Today was Wednesday. We had less than 48 hours. I need to go back to the house one last time, I said, thinking of the safe and the original documents my mother had hidden. But I can't let him see me. Stay away from there, Lily, Elliot warned. You have done your part. Let the law handle the rest. I am not going there to fight him, I said, standing up. I am going there to retrieve the evidence he does not even know he is sitting on, and I need to make sure he believes I am defeated. If he thinks I am fighting him, he will be on guard. I need him to think I am broken. I walked out of the office and into the cooling evening air. The city moved around me, oblivious to the fact that a man's life was being dismantled via email. I checked my phone. There was a missed call from Gordon. I did not call back. I would not speak to him again until I walked into that closing room. I looked at the date on my phone screen. Friday. Most people look forward to Friday as the start of the weekend. For Gordon, it was going to be the end of his world. I walked to the bus stop. My steps light. I realized I was humming a tune my mother used to sing while gardening. I wasn't going to go to the cemetery to visit her grave this week. I was going to attend a different kind of funeral. I was going to attend the funeral of Gordon Pike's greed. The digital ink on the preliminary agreement was barely dry when Gordon decided to prove that greed is not just a sin, but a form of stupidity. He did not simply accept the wire transfer instructions and wait for Friday. That would have been too easy. Instead, he decided to play the role of the shrewd businessman, a role he was spectacularly bad at. I sat in my studio, watching the email thread expand on my monitor while the hidden camera feed played on my tablet. It was a fascinating study in dysfunction. Gordon replied to the Raven Rock team not with a simple thank you, but with a counter-demand regarding the administrative fees. He wrote that he knew the market and that for a cash deal of this speed, the buyer should absorb all closing costs, including the transfer tax. He was haggling over $3,000 while sitting on a fraudulent deal worth $500,000. He is pushing it, I muttered to the empty room. On the tablet screen, I saw the reality behind the email. Gordon was sitting at the desk, his fingers hovering over the keyboard, looking nervous. But Kendra was standing behind him, her hands massaging his shoulders, her voice filtering through the tinny microphone. "Tell them to eat the costs. Gordon," she said, leaning down to whisper in his ear. "They are corporate. They have the budget. If you close this fast, we can be on a plane by Saturday morning." She swiped a finger across her phone screen and held it up to his face. "Look at this. The Sapphire Pavilion in Turks and Caicos. Private pool, butler service. 2 weeks there costs what your late wife spent on groceries in a decade. We deserve this." She was spending my mother's money before it had even left the bank. She was not just planning a vacation, she was planning a new life. And she was using the sale of my childhood home as her travel fund. Gordon typed the demand. I could see the sweat on his forehead on the grainy video feed. He was terrified of losing the deal, but he was more terrified of disappointing Kendra. My team at the task force, posing as Raven Rock, replied within 10 minutes. They agreed to pay the closing costs, but added a condition. Because they were waiving the physical inspection and rushing the title search, they required a signed affidavit from the seller stating that there were no other potential claimants to the property. This was the soft trap. In a normal sale, a title search takes weeks. By speeding it up, we gave Gordon a choice. Wait for a thorough check that would reveal the life estate and my claim, or sign a legal document swearing that I did not exist or had no rights. "He wants to skip the title check," I noted as I read Gordon's next email. "We do not need a full title binder," Gordon wrote, his arrogance bleeding through the text. "I have the original deed right here. The title is clean." I do not want to delay this with unnecessary paperwork. It was the classic behavior of a man selling something he did not own. He was trying to bypass the safeguards. Mason Reed, the lead investigator playing the part of the Raven Rock attorney, sent the reply I had helped draft. Company policy requires an affidavit of heirship and non-interference. Please confirm in writing that no other heirs, specifically the daughter mentioned in the obituary, have a claim to the estate. I watched Gordon read the email. He froze. He looked up at Kendra. "They are asking about Lily," he said, his voice cracking slightly. Kendra did not flinch. She took a sip of her wine and shrugged. "So? Lie? She is not living here. She walked out. Just tell them she signed a waiver. Who are they going to check with? Her? She's probably crying in a motel room somewhere." Gordon hesitated. "If I put it in writing, that is perjury." "It is only perjury if you get caught," Kendra snapped, her patience wearing thin. "Do you want the Turks and Caicos, or do you want to stay here and wait for her to lawyer up? Write it." Gordon turned back to the keyboard. I watched the cursor blink as he composed the sentence that would seal his fate. "Lily Scott has no claim to the property." He typed, "She is mentally unstable and has been estranged from the family for years. She has verbally waived all interest in the estate and is currently unreachable." I took a screenshot of the email. He had just slandered me and committed fraud in a single paragraph. He had painted me as the villain to cover his own crime. "Thank you, Gordon," I whispered. "That is the final nail." While Gordon was busy digging his grave via email, Kendra was busy on her phone. I had set up alerts for any online marketplace listings originating from our zip code, filtering for luxury goods. My phone buzzed. A user named KV Lux had just posted 3 new listings on a high-end resale app. I opened the first listing. It was a pair of diamond stud earrings, my mother's anniversary gift from 10 years ago. The second listing was a vintage silver tea service, the one that was missing from the buffet. The third listing made my blood run cold. It was a set of leather-bound first editions of Jane Austen, books my mother had collected since she was a teenager. Kendra had listed them for $200, a fraction of their worth, with the caption, "Old books, clearing out space, must go today." She was stripping the carcass. She wasn't just selling the house, she was selling the memories inside it, piece by piece, for pocket money. I forwarded the listings to Elliot. "She is liquidating assets." I texted. Elliot's reply was immediate. "Sending a preservation notice to the platform now. We are also logging the IP address to link it to the house." This makes her an active participant in the theft, not just a bystander. She is going down with him. The preservation notice would not stop the sale immediately, but it would flag the account and create a chain of evidence showing that Kendra was monetizing the estate without probate authority. Then, my phone rang. The screen flashed a name I had not seen since the day of the funeral. Gordon Pike. I stared at the phone. He was calling me. He had not called to ask if I had a place to sleep. He had not called to ask if I was eating. He was calling now because he was nervous. I picked up on the fourth ring. I did not say hello. I just held the phone to my ear and breathed. Lily? Gordon's voice was loud, aggressive, the faux confidence of a bully. I am here, Gordon, I said. My voice was steady, calm, the voice of a risk analyst watching a graph plummet. I am just calling to tell you to stay away from the house, he said. I have a business deal closing this week, and I do not want you coming around causing drama. The locks are changed for a reason. He was trying to intimidate me. He wanted to make sure I didn't show up and spook the buyer. He had no idea that I was the buyer. I am not coming to the house, Gordon, I said truthfully. I have no interest in fighting you on the lawn. Good, he grunted. You were always difficult. Your mother spoiled you. You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. The audacity of it took my breath away. A man selling my mother's house to pay his gambling debts was lecturing me on independence. Is that all? I asked. Yeah, that is all, he said. Just stay lost. Do not ruin my business. I won't ruin your business. Gordon, I said. I promise. I paused, letting the silence hang heavy on the line. Go ahead and sign the papers, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. I will be there. What? He asked, confused. Where? At the closing, I said. I will be there. I hung up before he could ask what I meant. I put the phone down on the table. My hands were not shaking anymore. I looked at the calendar. Friday, 10 o'clock in the morning. Kendra wanted a beach. Gordon wanted a bailout. I was going to give them a cell. The war of attrition began not with a lawyer's letter, but with a whisper campaign. Gordon knew that in the suburbs. Reputation was currency, and he decided to bankrupt mine before I could even step into a courtroom. He started poisoning the well immediately after the funeral, spinning a narrative to anyone who would listen, mostly the elderly neighbors who had known my mother for decades, but had not seen the inside of our house in years. I found out through a text message from Mrs. Albright, the woman who lived 3 doors down. She had been my mother's walking companion for 10 years. Her text was brief and stinging. Lily, I am so disappointed. Your mother would be heartbroken to know you are fighting Gordon over money while the grass is not even grown on her grave. Please let the poor man grieve in peace. Gordon was telling people I was unstable. He was painting a portrait of a greedy, estranged daughter who had abandoned her dying mother and only swooped back in like a vulture when there was an inheritance to claim. He told the mailman I was off my medication. He told the Homeowners Association president that I was harassing him for cash. He was building a preemptive defense so that if I did cause a scene, everyone would just shake their heads and say, "There goes poor, crazy Lily." Then came the direct threat. My phone buzzed with an email from Gordon's personal address. The subject line was simply, "Stay away." The body of the email was a masterpiece of projection. He wrote that if I attempted to enter the property or contact him or Kendra again, he would file for an immediate restraining order. He claimed he feared for his safety. He claimed I had been verbally abusive. He was trying to create a legal paper trail that would bar me from the closing on Friday. If I had a restraining order against me, showing up at the title company would get me arrested, not him. I did not reply. I did not scream into a pillow. I did not drive over there to scream at him, which is exactly what he wanted me to do. He wanted an outburst. He wanted proof of my instability instead. I went to work. I sat at my small, wobbling desk and organized my defense. I printed out every text message I had sent my mother in the last 6 months. I downloaded the call logs showing I had called her doctors 3 times a day, every day. while Gordon's number appeared on the logs, maybe once a week. I pulled the geolocation data from my phone, which created a map of my life for the last half year. It showed me at the hospital. It showed me at the pharmacy. It showed me sleeping at the hospice center. It showed Gordon at a casino in Atlantic City on the night my mother was moved to palliative care. I sent the packet to Elliot. Let him try for a restraining order. I wrote, I will walk into that hearing with a map of his neglect and my devotion. Elliot was working his own angle. He had contacted the hospital administration. We needed a medical opinion, something irrefutable. We needed a doctor to go on record stating exactly what my mother's cognitive and physical state was on the date the deed was allegedly signed. By noon, we had it. Dr. Evans, the attending neurologist, sent a sworn affidavit. He stated that due to the heavy sedation and the advanced progression of her illness, my mother lacked the motor control to hold a pen, let alone execute a complex legal signature, on that specific Tuesday. He noted that she was nonverbal and mostly comatose, starting 48 hours prior to the date on the deed. This was the shield. Now we needed the sword. I went back to the video of the notary, Arthur J. Miller. The name sounded generic, but men who sell their integrity usually have a history of it. I dug into the state licensing database. It took me 2 hours of scrolling through archived disciplinary actions, but I found him. Arthur J. Miller had not just made a mistake, he was a career criminal with a stamp. In 2021, he had been suspended for 6 months for notarizing a document without the signer present. In 2019, he had been fined for failing to maintain a proper journal of his acts. He was the kind of notary you called when you didn't want the law to look too closely. He was a rubber stamp for hire. I printed his disciplinary record. This was the piece that would turn a civil dispute into a criminal conspiracy. Gordon hadn't just found a sloppy notary. He had hired a known violator. That proved intent, but the biggest revelation came when I tried to understand why. Why was Gordon rushing this so hard? Why the fire sale prices? Why the desperate need to close by Friday? I found the answer in the digital trash bin of the shared email account my mother and Gordon used for household bills, an account he had forgotten to change the password for. Deep in the deleted folder was a notification from a subprime lender. It was a rejection letter dated 3 weeks ago. Gordon had applied for a hard money loan, a high-interest cash infusion of $50,000, using the house as collateral. The rejection reason was highlighted in red. Inability to verify clear title. Property is subject to potential probate. Gordon was drowning. He had tried to borrow against the house and failed because he didn't legally own it yet. He couldn't refinance. He couldn't take out a home equity line of credit. The banks were too smart for him. They saw the risk. That left him with only one option: sell the house for cash to a buyer who asked no questions, take the money, and run before the system caught up. He wasn't selling the house because he wanted to move to the beach. He was selling the house because it was the only way to turn the brick and mortar into the liquidity he desperately needed to cover whatever hole he had dug for himself. I forwarded the rejection letter to the task force. Motive established. I typed, financial desperation. The lead investigator, Mason Reed, called me shortly after. This is good. Lily, we have the motive, the method, and the opportunity, but you need to stay the course. Gordon needs to believe he has successfully bullied you into submission. If he thinks you are investigating him, he might spook and call off the closing. He won't spook, I said. He is too greedy. Don't take the chance, Mason warned. You need to disappear. Give him a win. I understood. I had to play the part of the beaten dog. I opened my social media accounts. I hadn't posted anything since the funeral announcement. I composed a new status update, making sure it was public so Gordon's spies, and Kendra, would see it. I am stepping back. I wrote, the last few weeks have been too much. I need time to grieve my mother properly without the conflict. I am turning off my phone for a while. Please respect my privacy. It was a surrender flag. Within 10 minutes, I saw a like from one of Kendra's friends. They were watching. They would show it to Gordon. He would read it and think he had broken me. He would think the threat of the restraining order had worked. He would relax. He would walk into that closing room on Friday with his guard down, thinking the only person sitting across the table would be a checkbook with legs. I closed my laptop. The room was dark now, the streetlights outside casting long, orange shadows across the floor. I felt a strange sense of calm. The frantic energy of the morning had evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. I reached for my bag and pulled out the small wooden box I had taken from the house. I opened it. Inside was my mother's wedding ring, the one thing I had managed to secure before Kendra could pawn it. I ran my thumb over the gold band. It was cool to the touch. Gordon told the world I was greedy. He told them I was crazy. He told them I abandoned her. Let him tell his stories. Let him enjoy his victory lap for 2 more days. I am not doing this for revenge. Mom, I whispered to the empty room. Revenge is emotional. Revenge is messy. This is not revenge. I snapped the box shut. This is a correction. The morning of the closing felt less like a business transaction and more like a military operation. The sky was a bruised purple, heavy with rain that refused to fall, casting a gray pallor over the city. I met Elliot at a coffee shop 2 blocks away from the title company's office at 8 o'clock in the morning. He looked impeccable, his suit pressed, his briefcase looking like it contained state secrets rather than legal briefs. We went over the plan one last time. It had to be precise. The mechanism of the trap relied on a specific sequence of events. If we sprang it too early, Gordon could claim he was just inquiring about a sale, claim it was a misunderstanding, or simply walk away. We needed him to cross the Rubicon. We needed ink on paper. Elliot explained the financial choreography. The money from Raven Rock Acquisitions, which was actually state-marked funds provided by the Bureau, had already been wired into the escrow account managed by the task force. It was sitting there, a glowing digital lure of $520,000. Gordon would see the proof of funds. He would see the check waiting to be cut. But the moment the transaction was flagged as fraudulent, the account would freeze. The money would never leave the closing table. Mason Reed, the lead investigator who had been coordinating the sting, joined us. He looked nothing like a cop. He was wearing a sharp navy suit and expensive loafers. He looked exactly like the high-powered corporate attorney he was pretending to be. I am wired, Mason said, tapping his lapel. Audio and video. Every word Gordon says about the title, every lie he tells about the heirs. It is all going to be recorded in high definition the moment he signs the deed and the affidavit of title. He has committed the crime. That is the signal. I nodded, my throat feeling dry. And I wait outside. You wait in the car across the street, Mason confirmed. We have a team in the van around the corner monitoring the feed. When Gordon signs, I will give the cue. I will ask for a final verification. That is when you walk in. I left them and went to my car, parking it directly across from the entrance of the office building. It was a nondescript brick structure, the kind that houses dentists and insurance agents, the kind of place where boring, life-altering paperwork happens every day. I sat in the driver's seat and locked the doors. I watched the minutes tick by on the dashboard clock. 9:15, 9:30. My hands were shaking. I placed them on the steering wheel to steady them, gripping the leather until my palms hurt. I told myself I was not afraid of Gordon. I had seen him for what he was, a small, desperate man who bullied women to feel tall. My fear was not physical. It was existential. This was the first time in 33 years that I was facing a major life event without my mother. Every graduation, every breakup, every job interview, she had been the first person I called. She would have been the one telling me to breathe, telling me to stand up straight. Now she was just a memory, a silent force guiding me from the grave. I looked at the passenger seat, half expecting to see her sitting there with her purse on her lap, checking her lipstick in the visor mirror, but the seat was empty. I was doing this alone. I reached into my bag and pulled out the file Elliot had prepared for me. I needed to focus on the facts. Facts were my armor. I opened the folder to the life estate deed. I read the clause again, tracing the words with my finger. The grantee's interest shall terminate immediately. It was such a dry, legal sentence, yet it held the power of a thunderbolt. My mother had written a self-destruct sequence into her own legacy. She had known that Gordon's greed was the one variable she could predict with 100% accuracy. She had bet on his avarice. And today, he was going to cash in that winning ticket for her. Beneath the deed was the copy of the will Elliot had marked up for me. He had highlighted the section that designated me as the sole remainder man. Once Gordon's rights were extinguished, the house did not go to probate. It did not go to the state. It snapped back to me. I pulled out a second envelope, one I had prepared myself the night before. It contained the screenshots of the luxury goods Kendra had listed online. The diamond earrings, the silver set, the first edition books. I had printed them in color, time-stamped and URL verified. This was my insurance policy. If Gordon tried to play the victim, if he tried to claim this was all a misunderstanding, I would lay these photos on the table. They were proof that this was not a desperate sale to pay medical bills. This was a looting. At 9:45, a silver sedan pulled up to the curb in front of the building. My breath hitched. The driver's door opened, and Gordon stepped out. He was wearing his best suit, a charcoal gray number that he usually saved for weddings. He buttoned the jacket as he stood up, smoothing down the front. He adjusted his tie in the reflection of the car window. He looked confident. He looked like a CEO arriving to close a merger, not a widower selling his dead wife's home to pay off a loan shark. There was a swagger in his step, the arrogance of a man who believes he has outsmarted everyone. Then the passenger door opened. Kendra stepped out. She was dressed for a celebration. She wore a white dress that was far too bridal for a business meeting, and she had those oversized sunglasses pushed up into her hair. She carried a designer handbag, likely purchased with one of the credit cards Gordon had opened in my mother's name. She walked around the car and linked her arm through Gordon's. She said something to him, and he laughed. It was a loud, booming laugh that carried across the street. It was the sound of a man who thought he was 10 minutes away from being rich. I watched them walk toward the glass doors of the building. Kendra looked up at the facade and smiled. A predatory, hungry smile. She wasn't seeing an office building. She was seeing the turquoise water of the Turks and Caicos. She was seeing the future she was stealing from me. I checked the time. 9:50. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Mason. Target on sight. We are live. I took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of old coffee and rain that clung to the car interior. Okay, I whispered. I watched them disappear into the lobby. They had no idea that the receptionist greeting them was an undercover officer. They had no idea that the notary waiting upstairs was not Arthur J. Miller, but a state investigator. They had no idea that the buyer was a recording device in a suit. They were walking into a stage play written entirely for them, and they were eager to deliver their lines. I looked at the dashboard clock again. 9:55. Gordon would be in the elevator now. He would be checking his watch, anxious to get the pen in his hand. He would be thinking about the wire transfer. He would be thinking that I was at home, crying, defeated, silenced. He forgot the one thing my mother always taught me. Silence is not weakness. Silence is just the pause before the strike. I unbuckled my seatbelt. I gathered the files, the deed, the will, the evidence of theft, and placed them into my leather portfolio. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I didn't look like the girl who cried at the funeral. I looked like the risk analyst who had just found the fatal error in the spreadsheet. The clock flickered. 9:59. I unlocked the car door. The sound was sharp in the quiet cabin. I looked up at the third-floor window of the building, where the conference room was located. I knew they were sitting down right now. I knew the water pitcher was sweating on the table. I closed my eyes for 1 second, summoning the image of my mother. Not the sick woman in the hospital bed, but the strong, vibrant woman who planted hydrangeas and taught me to balance a checkbook. "Mom," I whispered, my voice steady and hard as steel. "I am here." I opened the car door and stepped out into the gray morning. It was time to close the deal. Gordon Pike walked into the conference room with the swagger of a man who owned the building, rather than a man who was selling a stolen house to pay off a loan shark. I was standing in the narrow hallway just outside the heavy oak door, holding a tablet that streamed the video feed from the hidden camera inside. I adjusted the volume on my wireless earbud, listening to the sound of his footsteps on the plush carpet. He did not look at the view of the city skyline. He did not admire the mahogany table. He walked straight to the leather chair at the head of the table, pulled it out, and sat down with a heavy sigh of satisfaction. He buttoned his jacket, flashed a blinding synthetic smile at Mason Reed, and extended a hand across the table. "Good morning," Gordon boomed, his voice echoing in my ear. "Let's get this done. I have a flight to catch." He did not have a flight to catch. He had a debt to pay, but in his mind, he was already halfway to the Caribbean. Mason Reed shook his hand briefly. Mason was perfect. He was cold, efficient, and projected the exact aura of a corporate attorney who billed by the minute. He did not smile back. "Mr. Pike," Mason said, his voice flat. "Ms. Vale, thank you for coming on such short notice. My clients at Raven Rock are eager to close this transaction to meet their tax deadline." "We are happy to help," Kendra said. She was sitting next to Gordon, vibrating with a frantic energy. She wasn't nervous. She was hungry. Her leg was bouncing up and down under the table, the heel of her shoe tapping a rhythmic, greedy beat against the floor. She had her phone on the table, screen up, probably refreshing her bank account balance. "Let's cut to the chase," Gordon said, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the table. "Is the money ready? We agreed on a same-day wire." "The funds are in escrow," Mason replied, tapping his laptop. $520,000. Once the documents are executed and the title is cleared, the wire will be released to your designated account immediately. Gordon licked his lips. It was a small, unconscious movement, like a predator tasting the air. "Excellent. Let's sign." Mason reached into his briefcase and slid a stack of documents across the polished wood. It was a thick pile, purposefully daunting. The trap was hidden in the middle, buried under pages of standard boilerplate text. "We have the deed transfer," Mason listed, pointing to the papers, the bill of sale for the personal property, and the affidavit of title and non-interference. Gordon grabbed the pen. He didn't even pick up the documents to read them. He just flipped the corners, looking for the signature lines. A smart man would have read every word. A cautious man would have asked a lawyer to review them. But Gordon was neither smart nor cautious. He was a man running out of time, convinced he was the smartest person in the room. "Wait," Mason said, placing a hand gently on the paper to stop Gordon's pen. "I need to ask you a formal question for the record regarding the affidavit. This document states that you are the sole authority on this property and that there are no other potential heirs or claimants who could contest this sale." I watched the screen, holding my breath. This was it, the perjury trap. "My due diligence team found an obituary for your late wife that mentioned a daughter," Mason said, looking Gordon directly in the eyes. "Lily Scott, does she have any claim to this estate?" Gordon didn't blink. He let out a scoff, a sound of pure dismissal. "Lily?" Gordon said, waving his hand as if swatting away a fly. "She is a non-issue. The girl is unstable. She has a history of mental health problems and substance abuse. She hasn't been part of the family for years." My grip on the tablet tightened until the plastic frame creaked. He was not just lying. He was erasing me. He was rewriting my history to suit his theft. "And she has waived her rights?" Mason pressed. "I paid her off last week," Gordon lied smoothly. "I gave her $10,000 to help her get back on her feet, and she signed a waiver. She's probably halfway to California by now. You will never hear from her," Kendra chimed in, leaning over to touch Gordon's arm. "She made a terrible scene at the funeral. She just wanted money. Gordon was too generous with her, honestly." "Okay," Mason said. He removed his hand from the paper. "If you are willing to certify that in writing, we can proceed." Gordon didn't hesitate. He signed the affidavit. The scratch of the pen on the paper sounded like a gunshot in my ear. He flipped the page. The deed. The document that would legally trigger the forfeiture clause in my mother's will. "And this is the transfer of title," Mason said. Gordon signed his name with a flourish. One page, 2 pages, 3 pages, with every loop of ink. He was hammering a nail into his own coffin. He wasn't just selling a house. He was signing a confession. He was proving, beyond a shadow of a legal doubt, that he was attempting to alienate the title, thereby violating the life estate. He capped the pen and tossed it onto the table. "Done," Gordon said, sitting back with a grin. "Now, initiate the wire." Mason typed on his laptop for a few seconds. The silence in the room was heavy, thick with Gordon's desperation. "Escrow confirms wire initiation," Mason said. Gordon closed his eyes and let out a long breath. A smile spread across his face, a genuine, terrifying smile of relief. It was the smile of a man who thought he had just gotten away with murder. He looked at Kendra, and she squeezed his hand, her eyes wide and shining. They thought they had won. They thought the money was flying through the digital ether, on its way to wash away their debts and fund their tropical escape. "Pleasure doing business with you," Gordon said, standing up and reaching for his jacket. "Sit down, Mr. Pike," Mason said. His voice had changed. The corporate warmth was gone, replaced by the steel of an investigator. Gordon paused, halfway out of his chair. "Excuse me? The deal is closed." "There is one final verification step," Mason said, not looking up from his screen. "We need to confirm the identity of the counterparty." "I just gave you my ID," Gordon snapped, his patience fraying instantly. "Stop wasting my time. I have a plane to catch." "Do not take that tone," Mason said. "It will only take a moment." That was the cue. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Now, I put the tablet into my bag. I smoothed down the front of my blazer. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat that I felt in my throat, but my hands were steady. I wasn't angry anymore. I was cold. I was the ice that was about to shatter their glass house. I reached for the door handle. It was cool metal under my palm. Inside the room, Gordon was yelling, "This is ridiculous. I want to speak to your manager. The wire is already sent." "Actually," Mason said, "the wire has been flagged." "Flagged?" Gordon shouted. "Flagged for what?" I pushed the door open. It swung inward with a heavy, expensive silence. I stepped into the room. I didn't say a word. I just walked 3 paces onto the plush carpet and stopped. I stood there, clutching my portfolio, looking directly at Gordon. The room went deadly silent. Gordon turned his head. His mouth was still open, mid-shout, but the sound died in his throat. His eyes widened, bulging slightly. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like the blood had been siphoned out of him. He looked from me to Mason, and then back to me, his brain trying to process the impossibility of my presence. Kendra dropped her pen. It clattered onto the mahogany table, spinning noisily in the silence. Gordon slumped back into his chair, as if his legs had suddenly forgotten how to hold him. He looked at me with the expression of a man seeing a ghost. "Lily?" he whispered, his voice trembling. I didn't smile. I didn't scream. I just looked at the papers scattered on the table. The papers he had just signed, stripping himself of everything he thought he owned. "Hello, Gordon," I said softly. "I heard you paid me $10,000. I must have missed the check." I pulled out the chair opposite him and sat down. "But don't worry," I said, placing my mother's will on the table between us. "We have plenty of time to find it. The wire isn't coming." Gordon stared at me, and for the first time, I saw the dawn of realization in his eyes. He realized this wasn't a closing, it was an ambush, and he had just signed his own warrant. Gordon recovered from his initial shock with a speed that was almost impressive. The color returned to his cheeks, and a sneer curled his lip as he looked at me. He leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms over his chest, shielding himself with an armor of arrogance. "You are too late, Lily," Gordon said, letting out a short, dry laugh that sounded like sandpaper on wood. "I sold it. The papers are signed. The house is gone. You can drag me to court if you want, but you will be suing a man with empty pockets and a one-way ticket to the islands." He spoke like a man who had just locked the door on my life for the second time. He thought the ink on the page was his shield. He did not realize it was his shackle. Before I could answer, the door behind me opened again. Elliot Marsh walked in. He did not look like a visitor. He looked like Judgment Day in a three-piece suit. He carried a heavy file under his arm, and he placed it on the table with a thud that made the water pitcher rattle. "Mr. Pike?" Elliot said, his voice deep and resonating in the small room. "You seem to be laboring under a significant misunderstanding. You have the right to reside in the property. You do not, and never have, possessed the right to sell it." Gordon rolled his eyes. "I have the deed. I just signed the transfer." "You signed a piece of paper," Elliot corrected him, sliding the original life estate document across the table. He pointed a thick finger at the paragraph we had reviewed 1,000 times. "But you failed to read the fine print of your wife's will, specifically, the forfeiture clause." Gordon stared at the document. He squinted at the text Elliot was pointing to. "What is this?" Gordon muttered. "This," Elliot said, "is a life estate provision with a conditional limitation. Your wife wanted you to have a home, Gordon, but she knew you. She knew that eventually you would try to cash out, so she added a trigger: the moment you attempt to sell, mortgage, or transfer the title to a third party, your life estate is automatically and immediately terminated. The property rights revert instantly to the remainder man." Elliot turned and gestured to me. "Her," Elliot finished. Gordon looked up, his face pale. "No, that is not legal. I have a quitclaim deed." "A forged quitclaim deed," Mason Reed interrupted. Mason swiveled his laptop around so Gordon could see the screen. It wasn't showing a bank transfer. It was showing the video clip of Gordon and Kendra in the study, forging the signature while the crooked notary stamped the page. "We have the video, Gordon," Mason said, his voice dropping the corporate facade entirely. "We have the metadata. We have the notary's disciplinary record, and most importantly, we have the document you just signed 5 minutes ago." Mason tapped the stack of papers Gordon had just executed. "By signing this sales contract," Mason explained, "you legally proved your intent to alienate the title. You pulled the trigger on the forfeiture clause yourself. You didn't sell the house, Gordon. You just evicted yourself. As of 10 minutes ago, when your pen left the paper, you became a trespasser in Lily's home." Gordon looked at his hands, the hands that had signed the papers, as if they belonged to a traitor. "But the money," he stammered. "The wire." "The wire has been frozen," Mason said cold. "The escrow account is controlled by the State Financial Crimes Division. That $520,000 was never yours. It was bait, and you swallowed the hook whole." The air left the room. Gordon slumped in his chair, looking like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Kendra, who had been silent, suddenly stood up. She grabbed her designer handbag and tried to edge toward the door. "I did not sign anything," she said, her voice shrill. "This is between him and his family. I am leaving." "Sit down, Ms. Vale," a new voice said. 2 men in suits walked in from the hallway. They were not lawyers. They were investigators. One of them held up a clear plastic evidence bag containing a printout of the online listings. "We are not done with you," the investigator said. "We have confirmed that you listed and sold over $15,000 worth of assets belonging to the estate of the deceased. That is grand larceny, and since you conspired to facilitate this fraudulent sale to fund your flight risk, you are being charged as an accessory to wire fraud." Kendra froze. She looked at Gordon, waiting for him to defend her, to tell them it was all his idea, but Gordon was staring at the table, catatonic. The vacation to Turks and Caicos evaporated, replaced by the gray reality of an indictment. "And there is one more thing," Mason added, looking at Gordon. "The notary you used, Arthur J. Miller, we picked him up an hour ago. He's cutting a deal. He is singing about every fraudulent deed he stamped for you and your associates. This isn't just a family dispute anymore. Gordon, this is a RICO case. You didn't just break the law once, you broke the system." the reality finally hit Gordon. The arrogance, the bluster, the CEO facade, it all crumbled. He looked at me, and his eyes were wet. He didn't look like a villain anymore. He looked like a frightened, pathetic old man. "Lily," he croaked. He reached a hand out across the table, trembling. "Lily, please, I am your father. I raised you since you were 12. Do not let them do this. I was in debt. I was scared." "Bullshit," I said, cutting him off. I looked him dead in the eye. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I just felt a profound sense of closure. "You are not my father, Gordon," I said, my voice steady. "You did not raise me. You endured me. You tolerated my existence because you wanted my mother, and the moment she was gone, you tried to erase me. You didn't sell the house because you were scared. You sold it because you thought I was too weak to stop you." I stood up and picked up the deed, the real deed, from the table. "You were wrong," I said. The investigators moved in. I heard the distinct, metallic click of handcuffs. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see Gordon being led away. I didn't need that image. I already had the image I needed, the signature on the page that gave me my life back. I walked out of the building and into the rain. It felt clean. 2 hours later, I stood on the front porch of my mother's house. The black SUV was gone. The locksmith I had hired was already drilling out the brass lock Gordon had installed on the day of the funeral. "All set, miss," the locksmith said, handing me a new key. It was silver, shiny, and heavy. I put the key in the lock. It turned with a smooth, satisfying click. I pushed the door open. The house was quiet. It smelled of stale air and Kendra's cheap perfume. But underneath that, I could smell the faint scent of lavender and old paper, my mother's smell. I walked through the hallway. The walls were bare where the paintings used to be. The buffet was empty where the silver had been, but the structure was still there. The bones of the house were strong. I walked into the living room and sat down on the sofa where my mother used to read to me. I closed my eyes and exhaled, a long, deep breath that released 6 months of grief, anger, and fear. I had not screamed. I had not fought him in the street. I had simply stood still and let his own greed be the weapon that took him down. He had built a trap for me, but he had forgotten to check where he was standing. Revenge is not always about burning the world down. Sometimes, revenge is just protecting what is yours and letting the other person strike the match that burns them. I looked at the key in my hand. "I am home, Mom," I whispered, and for the first time since she died, the house didn't feel like a coffin. It felt like a beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on Gordon's fate. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Morgan Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.